Billionaire sees black worker looks exactly like missing daughter. What he discovers destroys him. Before we begin today's story, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We share powerful emotional stories every week, and trust me, this one will leave you questioning everything about family, love, and redemption. And as you watch, tell us in the comments, what would you do if you suddenly saw a stranger who looked exactly like your missing child? Richard Whitmore was a man who owned half the skyline of Boston. His company, Whitmore Holdings, dealt in luxury real estate, international shipping, and high-tech manufacturing. Wherever his name appeared, wealth followed. But behind the polished glass windows of his penthouse, Richard lived with shadows. Every morning he sat at the same mahogany dining table, a spread of untouched gourmet food before him. He drank black coffee in silence, staring at the framed photograph of a young girl with bright blue eyes and golden hair. Claire. His daughter. His only child. Gone for 3 years. Missing without a trace. The official reports said presumed dead, but Richard never accepted it. Every day he carried the ache like a stone in his chest. The police had failed him. His fortune had failed him. Even the best private investigators had come back empty-handed. To the world he was a titan. To himself, he was a broken father. Miles away, in a noisy factory on the outskirts of the city, machines roared as sparks lit the air. Among the rows of workers in steel-toed boots and faded uniforms stood Amara Lewis, a 26-year-old black woman with tired eyes and calloused hands. She moved with quiet determination, stacking crates, checking conveyor belts, fixing minor jams without complaint. To her co-workers, she was reliable. To her boss, she was invisible. Life had never been kind. Orphaned young, shuffled between foster homes, Amara had learned early that the world owed her nothing. She paid rent on a small basement apartment, cared for her neighbors' kids when their mother worked late, and dreamed, though she barely admitted it, of a life where she could go to college, maybe study engineering. But for now, dreams were luxuries. Survival came first. One brisk autumn morning, Richard visited one of his factories, a rare occurrence. His board urged him to stay connected with the ground level, though usually he preferred to leave operations to managers. Dressed in a charcoal suit, flanked by assistants, Richard strode through the factory floor. Workers straightened nervously as he passed. That's when it happened. He saw her. Amara. At first, it was just a flicker, a face in the crowd, another worker wiping sweat from her brow. But Richard stopped mid-stride. His heart lurched. His vision tunneled. Because when she turned her head and the overhead lights struck her features, Richard's world shattered. The shape of her jaw. The curve of her cheekbones. The way her lips pressed together when she concentrated. She looked exactly like Claire. Not similar. Not reminiscent. Identical. His missing daughter, reborn in another woman. Mr. Whitmore, his assistant whispered, tugging gently at his sleeve. But Richard didn't move. His eyes locked on Amara as if she were a ghost. Amara noticed the stares. Her body tensed. Men like Richard didn't look at women like her. She lowered her gaze, uncomfortable, and went back to work. But Richard couldn't tear himself away. He felt dizzy, as if time had looped back. Could it be? Was this some cruel trick? Or had his daughter somehow survived? That night, Richard sat in his penthouse, the city glittering below. But all he saw was Amara's face. He pulled Claire's photograph closer. Side by side, the resemblance was undeniable. Questions spiraled. How? Why? Who was this woman? And beneath the confusion was something darker, fear. Because if the truth connected Amara to Claire, it might reveal secrets Richard had buried long ago. The next day, Richard ordered his driver to take him back to the factory. He needed to see her again, to be certain. As the black car pulled up, Amara stepped out of the building, her lunch pail in hand. She glanced up, and for the briefest moment, her eyes met Richard's. Blue-gray, piercing, hauntingly familiar. Richard's chest tightened. His hands trembled. The world tilted. Because in Amara's eyes, he didn't just see his missing daughter. He saw the truth clawing its way back to him. A truth that could destroy everything. The factory floor buzzed with clattering machines and the sharp smell of hot metal. Amara's arms ached as she hoisted another heavy crate onto the conveyor belt. Sweat trickled down her temple, but she kept moving, her pace steady and precise. "Lewis," barked her supervisor, a short man with a clipboard. "Pick it up. You're slowing the line." Amara bit her tongue, swallowing the retort that burned on her lips. She had learned long ago that speaking up only earned her another warning slip. Beside her, her friend Carla, a wiry woman with a quick smile, leaned close and whispered, "Don't mind him. You're the best worker here. He just likes hearing his own voice." Amara smirked. Carla always knew how to lighten the load, even when the hours stretched long and the paychecks short. At the end of the shift, Amara clocked out and counted the cash tips she had made from covering the cafeteria line during her lunch break. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to cover half the overdue electricity bill. Her apartment was a single, windowless basement room. The pipes rattled when the upstairs neighbor flushed. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips. Amara placed her worn lunch pail on the counter, opened her mail, and sighed. Another bill. Another red stamp. She sat on the edge of her thin mattress, head in her hands. Sometimes the weight of it all, the endless work, the loneliness, the questions about who she was, pressed so heavy she could barely breathe. But then she remembered the promise she had made to herself at 16, never give up. Never let the world break you. She stood, pulled out her old sketchbook, and began to draw designs for machines she dreamed of building one day. Engineering. Her secret passion. For a few moments, the world felt lighter. Across town, Richard Whitmore stared at a framed photo on his mahogany desk. Claire, 12 years old, grinning with braces, her arms thrown around a golden retriever. 3 years since that smile vanished. 3 years since his world had dimmed. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Business associates wanted answers, shareholders wanted confidence. But every night, when the lights dimmed, he was just a father with an empty bedroom down the hall. He whispered to the photo, "Where are you, Claire? Please, just give me a sign." The next morning, Amara was assigned to a different section of the factory, the inspection line near the executive offices. She didn't think much of it. She just tied her hair back, tightened her gloves, and set to work. What she didn't know was that Richard Whitmore had decided to tour that very floor. His security team walked ahead, but Richard trailed behind, distracted, lost in thought. And then, he saw her. At first, it was just a glance, another worker in the endless line of workers. But something about the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes narrowed in concentration, the familiar flick of her hand as she brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Richard froze. His breath caught. It was as if time had folded back on itself. For in Amara, he saw not just a factory worker. He saw Claire. The clipboard slipped from his fingers. His security detail rushed to pick it up, but Richard barely noticed. His eyes were locked on Amara, his heart pounding with a mix of shock, hope, and terror. "Impossible," he whispered. "It can't be." But it is. The factory floor buzzed with clattering machines and the sharp smell of hot metal. Amara's arms ached as she hoisted another heavy crate onto the conveyor belt. Sweat trickled down her temple, but she kept moving, her pace steady and precise. "Lewis," barked her supervisor, a short man with a clipboard. "Pick it up. You're slowing the line." Amara bit her tongue, swallowing the retort that burned on her lips. She had learned long ago that speaking up only earned her another warning slip. Beside her, her friend Carla, a wiry woman with a quick smile, leaned close and whispered, "Don't mind him. You're the best worker here. He just likes hearing his own voice." Amara smirked. Carla always knew how to lighten the load, even when the hours stretched long and the paychecks short. At the end of the shift, Amara clocked out and counted the cash tips she had made from covering the cafeteria line during her lunch break. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to cover half the overdue electricity bill. Her apartment was a single, windowless basement room. The pipes rattled when the upstairs neighbor flushed. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips. Amara placed her worn lunch pail on the counter, opened her mail, and sighed. Another bill. Another red stamp. She sat on the edge of her thin mattress, head in her hands. Sometimes the weight of it all, the endless work, the loneliness, the questions about who she was, pressed so heavy she could barely breathe. But then she remembered the promise she had made to herself at 16, never give up. Never let the world break you. She stood, pulled out her old sketchbook, and began to draw designs for machines she dreamed of building one day. Engineering. Her secret passion. For a few moments, the world felt lighter. Inside was the report. Amara's hands shook as she unfolded it. Her eyes darted across the lines of text until they landed on the conclusion. Amara's breath shattered. This can't be real. Richard's eyes filled with tears. It is. You're my daughter. Amara pushed back from the table, heart pounding. She wanted to scream, to run, to deny it. But deep inside, something she had buried her whole life stirred, the ache of belonging, the yearning for family. Her eyes blurred. Her voice cracked. Then why was I left to suffer? Why did I grow up with nothing, while you had everything? Richard flinched. His silence was louder than words. Because the truth, the real truth, was still hidden. And it was a truth that could destroy him. Amara didn't return to the factory the next day. Or the day after. She stayed in her basement apartment, blinds shut, heart racing every time her phone buzzed. How could she face the world knowing everything she thought she was might be a lie? She looked in the mirror, tracing the lines of her face. The girl in the reflection was still Amara Lewis, foster kid, factory worker, survivor. And yet in her eyes, she saw Claire Whitmore. She slammed her palms against the sink. No. I'm not her. I can't be. But the DNA report sat on her nightstand, whispering otherwise. Meanwhile, Richard was unraveling. For 3 years he had lived in mourning. Now he walked through his penthouse alive with a manic energy. He called private investigators, lawyers, even journalists. My daughter is alive, he told them, his voice trembling. She's been found. But when pressed for details, Richard faltered. Because the one person who mattered most, Amara, wasn't ready to accept him. And deep down, he feared the moment she would start asking questions he couldn't answer. 3 days later, Richard showed up at Amara's apartment. Not in his black car, not flanked by assistants. Alone. She opened the door a crack, her expression hard. What do you want? To talk, he said softly. Please. Just give me 10 minutes. Reluctantly, Amara let him in. The sight of the billionaire standing awkwardly in her tiny, dimly lit apartment was almost absurd. The walls were cracked, the furniture mismatched, a far cry from his marble kingdom. Richard glanced around, guilt flickering across his features. You grew up like this. Amara crossed her arms. What did you expect? A trust fund. His throat tightened. I should have been there. I should have. Her voice cut sharp. Then tell me. Why weren't you? Richard hesitated. The night Claire disappeared. I left her with a nanny. I was at a business dinner. When I came back, she was gone. Amara narrowed her eyes. And you didn't find her for 3 years? I tried. I searched everywhere, spent millions on investigators. But somehow, Amara interrupted, I ended up in foster care, bounced around the system like a lost file. Explain that. Richard's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Because the truth was uglier than he dared to say. Word leaked before either of them was ready. A tabloid headline appeared online. Whitmore heiress alive. Billionaire seen with factory worker. By morning, reporters camped outside Amara's building. Cameras flashed whenever she stepped out. At the factory, co-workers whispered behind her back. Did you hear? She's the billionaire's daughter. No way. Look at her, she doesn't belong in that world. Amara's chest burned with shame. She hadn't asked for this. When she confronted Richard, he swore it wasn't him. I didn't tell anyone, I promise. But Amara wasn't sure she believed him. Movie camera, if you were Amara, would you walk away from the man who claims to be your father, or demand every answer no matter how painful? Comment below, because Amara's choice in this moment changes everything. That night, Richard invited her again to his penthouse, promising privacy. Against her better judgment, Amara went. He showed her Claire's old bedroom, untouched, like a shrine. The canopy bed, the stuffed animals, the books with little notes scribbled in the margins. Amara touched the walls, her throat tightening. This could have been my life. Richard's hand shook as he reached for her shoulder. It is your life, Amara. You're my daughter. We can rebuild what was stolen. Amara pulled away. Stolen by who, Richard? Who let it happen? Tell me the truth. Richard's face went pale. Because the truth was this: Claire's disappearance had not been a random tragedy. It was tied to a choice Richard had made, a choice born of greed and arrogance. And if Amara discovered it, everything he built would crumble. Amara's eyes blazed as she turned on him. If you want me to believe you, then stop hiding. Tell me everything. Or I walk away and never look back. Richard's lips parted, but no words came. The weight of secrets pressed down on him. Outside the glass walls, the city glittered, a kingdom he might soon lose. Inside, Amara stood, unflinching, demanding the truth. And Richard realized that the daughter he had found was not the same as the one he had lost. This one was stronger, sharper, and she would not be silenced. The scandal had burned for weeks. Headlines screamed. Stock tickers plunged. Richard's empire, once untouchable, was now divided and devoured by rivals. But in the small apartment where Amara sat, silence reigned. She had shut off her phone, ignored the cameras, and cut herself off from Richard. The world wanted a spectacle, the heiress and the fallen king. But Amara wanted only clarity. Was she his daughter? Yes. The DNA said so. But was she his family? That was the harder question. One morning, while buying groceries, Amara overheard two strangers whispering at the checkout. That Whitmore girl, she's set for life. Set for life? Please. She doesn't belong in that world. Look at her. Amara's chest tightened. All her life, she'd been told she didn't belong. In foster homes, she was the quiet kid no one chose. At the factory, she was just another pair of hands. Now, even as an heiress, she was seen as an outsider. She walked home in tears. But halfway there, she stopped. No. She wasn't going to let others define her anymore. She would decide who she was. Meanwhile, Richard's penthouse had become a tomb. Empty bottles littered the counters. The once pristine suit jackets hung wrinkled and untouched. He had been forced out of Whitmore Holdings. His friends vanished. His reputation, shredded. The only constant was the photo of Claire. But now, when he looked at it, he didn't just see the daughter he lost. He saw Amara, alive, furious, unyielding. And he wondered if there was still time to earn her forgiveness. A week later, Amara agreed to meet him. Not at the penthouse, but in a quiet diner on the edge of town. Neutral ground. Richard looked older, his shoulders slumped, his hair streaked with gray. Amara slid into the booth across from him, her posture straight, her eyes guarded. He spoke first. I've lost everything. Amara didn't flinch. Not everything. You still have the truth. And you still have me, if you deserve me. Richard's eyes welled. I don't. But I want to try. Amara leaned forward. You want to try? Then listen. I don't need your money. I don't need your empire. What I need is honesty. No more secrets. No more lies. Richard nodded. You have my word. She held his gaze. Words won't fix what you did. But actions might. Over the next months, Richard began dismantling what was left of his empire, not to save it, but to atone. He sold off assets, donating millions to programs for foster youth, scholarships, and shelters. For the kids like Amara, he told the press. Amara watched cautiously. She didn't trust him fully, not yet. But she saw the effort. She saw him trying. And slowly, a fragile thread of connection began to form. One evening, Richard invited her again to Claire's untouched room. But this time, he handed her the key. It's yours, he said softly. Not as a symbol of what I lost, but of what I hope we can build. Amara stepped inside. She ran her fingers over the dusty shelves, the faded posters. She closed her eyes and whispered, I'm not Claire. I'm Amara. Richard's voice cracked. Then let me be the father you never had, Amara. She turned to him, tears streaking her cheeks. Not father. Not yet. But maybe family. Months later, the media frenzy died down. Richard was no longer a billionaire, but he was free of the lies, the weight of empire, the gilded cage. And Amara? She was no longer invisible. She had enrolled in college, studying engineering like she always dreamed. On weekends, she and Richard met for coffee. They laughed awkwardly, argued often, but beneath it all, a fragile bond grew stronger. The world saw scandal. But they saw something else, two broken lives, daring to start over. Movie camera, and that's the end of today's story. Tell me, do you believe people like Richard can truly change, or are some mistakes unforgivable? And if you were Amara, would you have chosen forgiveness, or walked away forever? Drop your answers in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more powerful stories each week.